This is BBC Television.
When that I was and a little tiny boy, with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, a foolish thing was but a toy, for the rain it raineth every day. With a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came to man's estate, with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, against knaves and thieves men shut the gate, for the rain it raineth every day. With a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, for the rain it raineth every day.
Earlier this evening, an audience gathered at the Waterloo Road to see the Old Vic Company perform for the last time. The play of that last performance is Shakespeare's Measure for Measure. This performance is the end of 50 years of theatrical history. Since 1914, the Old Vic has been the home of Shakespeare in London. During that time, its fame has spread beyond London to the whole of England, beyond England internationally, with performances from Sydney to Moscow, from South Africa to San Francisco. Tonight, we're telling the story of this theatre through some of the many personalities who have shared in and contributed to its fame. We go first to America, to Minneapolis. Here, in one of America's larger industrial cities, Tyrone Guthrie has just started yet another new theatre. Guthrie has produced at the Vic over a period of 20 years and was its administrator for 10 of them.
The story of the Old Vic began in 1817 with the building of the theatre, part of a development in southeast London which followed the building of that new bridge over the Thames which commemorated Wellington's victory at Waterloo. The district was planned as a rather elegant one, and at first the theatre flourished. Vestris danced there, Keane acted there, Paganini played the violin. It was quite a glamorous house. But gradually the neighbourhood declined. So the bourgeoisie moved further out to the higher ground of Denmark Hill, Streatham and so on, and the theatre now stood in the slums. It declined into a vaudeville house. Once known as the Royal Victoria Theatre, it now became the Old Vic. The novelist Kingsley in Alton Locke describes it as a haunt of pickpockets and prostitutes, the focal point for the lowest nightlife of one of the roughest, toughest parts of mid-Victorian life, in Victorian London. It was now that a Miss Emma Cons appeared upon the scene, a mousy little spinster in charge of a philanthropic housing project. You might think that such a person confronted with such an institution as the Vic then was would have thrown up tiny mittened hands, wailed for papa, and taken the high strikes. Not so Miss Cons. She didn't take the high strikes, she took action. She got together an influential committee, raised money, and bought the dump, lock, stock, and barrel, especially barrel. Now began a new era. The Old Vic was renamed the Royal Victoria Coffee Tavern, a name which fortunately never caught on, and reopened with nothing but temperance beverages on sale, and, I quote the prospectus, the program of purified entertainment. Needless to say, the coffee tavern was a crashing flop. The wealthy evangelical noblemen who were the backbone of Miss Cons' committee found themselves year after year in financial Queer Street. They tried to withdraw and close the coffee tavern, but after a few sharp words from Miss Cons about putting one's hand to the plough, and if they pulled out, the theatre would, and they knew fine that this was true, immediately revert to its bad old state, the noblemen came to heel. They pouted but coughed up. After some 10 years of desperate and unsuccessful struggle, Miss Cons was joined in management by her niece, Miss Lilian Baylis. Miss Baylis's first act after her appointment was to hot up the coffee, her second to hot up the program. But in this, she reckoned without the evangelical peers. They resented and they fought her every attempt to liven up the purified entertainment. But they, in turn, reckoned without the fact that Miss Baylis had one all-powerful, indeed almighty ally. God has sent some pretty staggering messages to his servants, but I believe in Miss Baylis's case he went to the limit. When, in the despair and failure and frustration over the coffee tavern, this poor woman went down on her knees and said, "Oh God, what shall I do?" Do you know what the answer was? "Lilian," God says, "you must give your audience grand opera." Can you beat it? Well, she gave her audience grand opera out of nothing. 6 amateur singers clustered round an upright Ebach, giving out gems from the Lily of Killarney. Out of that grew an opera company. The growth took 10 years' hard labor. And when that was accomplished, Miss Baylis knelt again and clasped her hands. "Oh, God," she said, "I've done what you told me. What next?" "Well," said God, "what about Shakespeare? I think your people might like Shakespeare."
So Lilian Baylis gave Shakespeare a try. The first productions were by Matheson Lang and his wife Houghton Britton. This is their production of The Merchant of Venice. The audience rather more interested in the camera, perhaps, than in Shakespeare. But it was really with the arrival of Ben Greet, one of the old-style Victorian actor managers, that things began to move. He ran the place throughout the Great War. His company owed a great deal to the Thorndikes, Russell and Sybil.
Well, of course, I'd worked with Ben Greet for about 4 years in America at the beginning of the century. And then I received a letter one day from him saying, "Come and join me at the oddest theatre you've ever struck. Run by a woman called Lilian Baylis, who's as mad as you are. You'll like her." That's how it came to pass.
So you went, yes.
And then I went.
Now, you were there when Lilian Baylis first started her association with Shakespeare, really. Did you find at that stage, how much real knowledge did she have of what Shakespeare was about?
I don't think she had any knowledge of... I don't think she'd ever read a play through. I don't think she knew much about Shakespeare. She knew vaguely that there was a play called As You Like It and a play called Macbeth. But she wanted Shakespeare for the people. She thought it was good education for them. Real parish entertainment, you know. That's really what it was.
And did you find that, in fact, she ever commented on the plays, too?
Yes. Her comments were very shrewd and very good, though she knew nothing about the literary side of things at all. But sometimes she'd be walking through the theatre with sausage and mash on a plate or something, eating it in the meanwhile, and shout out something, "That's not right, that's not right." And nearly always her judgments were quite good. I remember when I was going to play Macbeth first, I said, "I can't play that sort of woman. She's so awful." She said, "Don't be so silly. You love your husband, don't you? You love your children. Well, you want the best for them. That's all Lady Macbeth wanted for him." And, of course, it did give me a real good clue to what Lady Macbeth was. Oh, yes, she could always give one a very good slant on a character.
Now, did you find it was very tricky trying to start a new venture like this in wartime, and how did you keep a regular company?
Well, yes, it was difficult in wartime because, of course, gradually, at the beginning, we had some men. The beginning of 14, at the beginning of the war, we had some men, but gradually they were seeped away, you see, and had to go. And I was a lucky girl. I was the one that loved playing boys' parts. I was always jealous of Macbeth. I mean, Lady Macbeth doesn't touch him, and Lear, and all those parts which I longed to play. Of course, I didn't play them, but I was allowed to play Prince Hal and Ferdinand, Launcelot Gobbo, and the Fool in Lear. So I got some good parts to play of men. I always am irritated being a woman on the stage because the men get all the jam and the fun.
What was that first Old Vic audience like? How did they take the new diet of Shakespeare and the classics?
Oh, they were wonderful, especially the people of the new cut, because they'd never had anything like it before. And they didn't take it as an intellectual exercise, but as something. And I remember one old woman, we were doing matinees at the Trojan Women in there. And one old woman, because I lived in a slum in Westminster, one old woman came up to me and said, "Here, dearie, we had a lovely time with the Old Vic yesterday. We had a good walk over the bridge. We saw the Trojan women, and we did have a good cry. And we come back and we had shrimps for tea. Oh, those Trojan women was just like us. Haven't we lost our boys in this war?"
Also appearing with the Vic at the time, before he was hustled off to the war, was Robert Atkins. Here he is as Sir Toby Belch in 1916. He came back after the war as Director of Productions.
Oh, yes, I well remember writing to Miss Baylis from the trenches. And in the letter, in a very comical fashion, I suggested the first list of plays that I would do, if I got through. But I arrived home in 1919, went to see her. In 1920, I was engaged, and the first Shakespeare plays I produced at the Old Vic were the plays set down in that letter.
I expect with an ambitious program like this, you needed a much wider audience that you'd get just locally.
Well, of course, when I first arrived there, the audiences were good, but not too bad. And then, of course, in 21, I produced Peer Gynt, and that brought over the West End Theatre.
The young actor wanted to get a raise. What did he do about it?
The what?
If he wanted to get a raise in salary.
Ah, well, I can tell you quite a funny story about that. During one Christmas time, a young actor who had been with us for some time and begging for a little help in the salary came to me and said he couldn't get it. So I took him into Miss Baylis's office, and there were her walls plastered with the Christmas cards from the school children. And among the exhibits was the most wonderful model with electric lights of the manger. Well, she showed him some postcards and blessed the Lord, etc., 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 then took him to this model, turned out all the lights, and then began to put on the switches of the model, do you see? And the last switch fell upon the Saviour's face. Tears were pouring down her cheeks, and she said, dear boy, in front of this, we cannot talk of salary. Mr. Atkins will bring you back in a few weeks' time.
The outstanding actor at the Vic in the early 20s was Ernest Milton, who played pretty well every Shakespearean lead and whose Hamlet still influences nearly every actor who saw it. In 1925, Andrew Lee took over as producer at the Vic. His company was headed by Balliol Holloway and by Edith Evans, who played Catherine in The Taming of the Shrew and Portia. She, too, got to the Vic through a bit of letter writing.
Well, I asked to go there. I wrote to Lilian Baylis and asked her if I could come. I'd been playing mostly modern comedy in the West End, and then, of course, The Way of the World down at Hammersmith. And Basil said, would I go to Drury Lane and play Helena in Midsummer Night's Dream? And I went, and apparently it was a disaster. I had the large star room and an ante-room, and on the first night nobody came to see me, except the director. Basil Dean, he was delighted. He was the only one. Nobody else was. All the press and everything horrid. So I thought, all right, I'll go and find out how you do this Shakespeare, you see.
And did you find coming to the Vic as a West End actress, was there any difficulty there, any resistance to you inside the company?
Oh, no, not the company, not the company. They were pets. The audience were very suspicious. The first 1 or 2 plays, they didn't much care for this woman coming from the West End. They didn't know that she was really trying very hard to learn, but they didn't know that. And, of course, I was... the wardrobe wanted to make new frocks for the West End actress, you see. And they were going to put it all on me, that I'd asked for them. Well, I was endowed with a slightly artful quality, because I knew Lilian, you know, would quite easily say... because she loved economy, you know, not spending money. She would say, oh, she must wear the dresses that we've got, you see. So when they wanted to talk new clothes, I got Lilian to come too, you see. I said, come on, Lilian, come up in the wardrobe. They want to talk to you about, of course, I got everything, you see. She couldn't say no. They were all enthusiastic. And they made beautiful dresses. And they lasted. They wore them over and over again. I saw them in other plays. And I was pleased. They were nice dresses. Just a little feminine subtlety.
The next producer to take on the thankless task of handling the Vic on a budget of £15 to £20 a show was Harcourt Williams. Now, he had the good fortune to tempt to the Vic one of the most outstanding young actors in the West End, John Gielgud, who gave his Richard II, his Macbeth, rather Staggered Bay, and perhaps most impressively, his first Hamlet.
I was at the Vic before I went there as juvenile lead, which I did in 1929. In 1921, when I was still a student at Eddie Benson's school, I heard there were walk-ons to be had at the Old Vic for students not paid. So I rushed up and managed to be taken on to walk on in Robert Atkins's Peer Gynt and also in Wat Tyler, King Lear, and I think 2 other plays in which Russell Thorndike played the leading part.
The atmosphere must have been tremendously different after the West End.
Well, I suppose it was. But it was wonderful to have these great parts to play and only to have a few weeks, 3 weeks, to rehearse them. One only had time to learn the words and plunge in and take risks and experiments. And one didn't really know what enormous dangers one was risking by tackling parts like Macbeth and Antony and Cleopatra without really studying them properly beforehand. And in some ways, perhaps I think one played them better through not being so aware of their difficulties and complications.
And it must have been a very new kind of audience for you. They were still very mixed at the Old Vic at that time.
I suppose it was. The excitement was that the plays didn't catch on very easily. When I first went there, we didn't do well at all because the public seemed to resent Harcourt Williams being a very pure, very idealistic director who didn't make us talk distinctly enough. We had some very bad notices in the first plays, and we won through on sheer hard work and enthusiasm, and everybody helped, and both Sir Ralph and I felt that we were being of some help to Billy Williams, who was a charming vegetarian with a tin of Bemex under his arm and always tired and exhausted and pressing on. And he used to say to us, "Oh, do help me with this scene," or "do suggest something," and we used to do it. And I think it gave us both a great deal of confidence and interest in the plays themselves, quite apart from our own performances in them.
You had regular characters in the audience too, I guess.
Oh, we certainly did. It was an extraordinary audience because there was a famous character, I always remember this story, Miss Pilgrim, who had a newspaper shop in Islington, and she used to walk across London to see the performances of the Vic. She'd been a fan for years, and she always sang "God Save the King" in a very cracked voice, and when the national anthem was badly played by the orchestra at the end of the performance, and the audience used to laugh at her, and we used to laugh too behind the scenes. Anyhow, she was a well-known character, and she didn't appear to be really a fan, although she was a sort of character. However, later, after I'd left, and Tyrone Guthrie took over the theatre and had Charles Laughton and Flora Robson and a lot of stars in his company, she disapproved of this change in the policy very much. And she wrote several very rude letters to Lilian Baylis and to members of the company. One night when they came out at the stage door at the end of the performance, all the company was surprised to find Miss Pilgrim standing on the pavement asking them to sign autographs on a piece of paper which she held in her hand. And the next day, Guthrie received a letter, so it said, signed by Miss Pilgrim and the entire company demanding his resignation.
By now, Shakespeare was doing nicely. Lilian Baylis began to look for a new conquest or two. She'd had her eye for some time on the dilapidated theatre of Sadler's Wells and decided now to extend her empire. This picture was taken at the opening party for the new theatre. Twelfth Night went into rehearsal, Harcourt Williams directing and John Gielgud as Malvolio. And on June the 6th, 1931, Sadler's Wells was open again. But the person most affected by this new move was not a Shakespearean performer. She was a young dancer who'd been associated with the Vic for the past 4 years.
How well I remember my first interview with Miss Baylis. What a turning moment it was in my career. Of course, she told me nothing can be done for 4 years. Nothing can be done until the Sadler's Wells Theatre is built. So I knew I had a long wait. But luckily for me, Miss Baylis had always considered she knew something about dancing. In fact, as a young girl, she had taught what she called fancy dancing in South Africa. And she was determined that she would engage me to teach movement to her drama students and to look after the hands of her actors and actresses. She said there was no such thing as an actor and actress who knew how to use their hands. So I worked for her for the princely sum of £1 a week for those 4 years.
What did you think of your chances of getting a real live ballet company?
I never had any doubt. You see, she was a great idealist, without any illusions. And that is something that will give anyone that is working for such a person tremendous confidence. I always knew it would come right in the end.
In 1933, Tyrone Guthrie succeeded Harcourt Williams as director, and the new season went into rehearsal. But it was a season with a difference. Guthrie was determined to combat what he calls the slightly smug feeling that the greatness of the plays excused some mediocre performances and a downright dowdiness on the stage. He imported Charles Laughton, hot from his film success, to play Shakespeare's Henry VIII, and persuaded Miss Baylis to lay out more money to bring the sets and costumes up to standard. With Flora Robson as leading lady, the season was a great success. But after his first bout with Miss Baylis, the wily Guthrie decided to leave the Vic for a spell while still ahead on points. It was about this time that a 26-year-old schoolmaster who decided finally to turn to the stage came for an audition to the Vic.
Well, you know, to do an audition for an actor at any time, especially for his first job, and especially in front of Lilian Baylis, is pretty awful. And I arrived early and heard a lot of people doing Hamlet, King Lear, Romeo, and so on. And I thought they all sounded very good, and they went on for quite a long time, and then I thought I won't do Hamlet, I'll do something less obvious. I'll do the Henry IV prologue, which is chorus, and rather something I'd done sometime, rather stylized thing, you know, the Peking opera sort of stuff. I from the Orient to the drooping West, and so on. And I'd only done 2.5 lines. Then I heard Lilian's voice say, yes, all right, yes, well, can you do something else? Not Shakespeare. I wasn't prepared for that at all. I thought this was the home of Shakespeare, practically, and all I could think of at the moment was I said I could do a little Milton, Miss Baylis. She said, all right, do a little Milton then. And that was the opening of Samson Agonistes, and Samson, you remember, is blind, and so I was saying a little onward, lend thy guiding hand to these, and she said, that's enough, thank you very much. And everybody else had gone on for hours. And however, she did say, come down, I want to speak to you. And then she said, well, of course, you see, I can't see anything but hands. I couldn't pay you anything because, you know, I've got to pay the people that carry the play, which is always a sound point. But she said, I couldn't pay you anything. Then she started talking to somebody else, and the producer of that season, Henry Cass, drew me aside and said, she's trying to get you to come for nothing. Don't. Would you come for £3 a week? And I said, yes, if you give me something to do, I will. And he said, my dear boy, if you can play Romeo, you should play Romeo. However, I never went there until 2 years later, when she bettered the offer, and I was sort of juvenile lead in a wonderful company with Edith Evans and Laurence Olivier. And that was my first professional appearance in London.
By now, Guthrie was back in the saddle with a very exciting company. Laurence Olivier, tempted to spend all his time on films, changed his mind with his performance as Henry V and as Coriolanus. Sybil Thorndike was back at the Vic to play Volumnia. The company took Hamlet to Elsinore for the first time and were a great success in spite of the rain. And a young actor who started by playing fantastics and Shakespearean clowns then appeared in Guthrie's modern dress Hamlet, umbrellas and all, and made a great impression.
The idea of a modern dress Hamlet at the Old Vic appalled the old guard. But the Vic audience was always tremendously generous and more than went halfway to meet a young actor.
We all remember your modern dress Hamlet. It sticks out in our memories of the Old Vic. But what do you yourself remember about the theatre?
I think, for me, the greatest impression the Vic has made on me has not been as an actor, but as a member of the audience. I started going when I was very young, and first fell in love with the theatre there. Saw Ralph Richardson and Sybil Thorndike in The Night of the Burning Pestle, Ernest Milton's Hamlet, Peggy Ashcroft as Juliet, and Gielgud's production of The Merchant of Venice, which I think cost £80 and was a tremendous innovation at the time. And, you know, you could see all these things for threepence a go in the gallery, which was all I could run to. Later on, when it went up to sixpence, and I only had 6 a week to spend on any kind of entertainment, it was a hard blow.
And when you crossed the footlights, were you disappointed?
Oh, no, you couldn't be disappointed in the Old Vic. The Old Vic was a mecca. And it always had this marvelous atmosphere of hard work going on, you know, with a new play coming up every 3 weeks, and the smell of size and sawdust, and there was always a piece of scenery being painted, or a throne being made, or props arriving, and it was a thrilling place to work in.
How did you yourself get on with Miss Baylis?
I had very little contact with Miss Baylis. I passed her in a corridor once, just as I dropped 3 pennies coming from the canteen, and she said, Father, Son, and Holy Ghost in passing, deeply religious woman. And then at my first dress parade, in Love's Labour's Lost, she beckoned me and said, let's have a look at your legs, dear. And I was a bit startled, and she said, it's all right, you'll do. And I was all right for that play, but got the sack, I think, about 6 weeks later.
Guthrie's production of Macbeth, notoriously unlucky play with Olivier in the lead, brought tragedy to the Vic. 3 days before it opened, in November 1937, the company was shocked and stunned to hear of the death of Lilian Baylis. Tyrone Guthrie tells what she meant to the theatre.
was the simple faith at which it's easy to sneer, for it often in worldly terms appeared rather absurd. But the plain fact is that it could and did move mountains. During the years of her management, in the teeth of reason and common sense, often in the teeth of her governors, by sheer faith and unremitting hard work, she created first an opera company, what is now the Sadler's Wells Opera, then a Shakespeare company, and finally a company of dancers now world famous as the Royal Ballet. Of course, she didn't do all this single-handed, but hers was the original inspiration, the religious conviction that it should, and therefore could, and therefore must be so. To her, more than to any other single person, is due the conception, new to this country, though long familiar on the continent, that the theatre is an institution with a duty to serve the community, rather than a business whose object is to be financially successful.
Guthrie himself took over as administrator, and the company continued. But the war was near. Gielgud came back to play a memorable Lear after the outbreak of war. But in May 1941, a German bomb scored a direct hit on the theatre. The Old Vic took to the road. One company toured the Welsh mining villages with Sybil, Thorndike and Lewis Castle. Another went to Burnley and tried to keep going among the factory chimneys. Somehow, the company hung on until the end of the war. Laurence Olivier, now down at Chichester, remembers how bad things seemed.
Things looked very bad indeed, and it seemed as if, in fact, matters had reached the end. And Tyrone Guthrie had been running it all this time, in fact, I think about 6 years before the war. He got the idea that if Ralph and I could be got out of the Navy, and if we joined him in the direction of the thing, that we might make a go of it. And John Burrell was asked to join us as well. And so permission was applied for our release from the Navy, which was granted with a lack of reluctance, which I'm afraid was almost hurting. However, Ralph and I got over that all right, and so we started to work with the Old Vic again.
And when you were preparing that first season, was there a lot of confidence in the company? Did you have any idea that it was going to be such a huge success as it was?
No, we didn't. And if it had not been, it would have been the end there again. But we opened full of hope and full of ideas. We were very lucky in the fact that there are two boom times in the theatre. One is in an ordinary boom time, I mean for the serious theatre, when everybody has seen their complete fill of all the froth and all the musicals and all the leg shows that they want. And their brains begin to demand something of a little better meat and bones and blood and flesh and brain. And then they go to the serious theatre. Now, in a wartime, the same thing happens. We were, too, very lucky in that there were hardly any other theatres in London alight. When we opened, we were one of 5 only. And we were the only ones, really. John Gielgud came in a little later and started the same sort of idea, the Haymarket. And so we had, really, luck on our side. But if we hadn't, I'm afraid that then would have been the end of the Old Vic, that time.
That first season of the new was, in fact, the greatest success the Vic had ever known. The pillars of the company were Olivier and Richardson. They played together in Henry IV. Olivier starred as Richard III and as Oedipus in Michel Saint-Denis' production. Richardson had a great success with Peer Gynt and a definitive performance of Falstaff.
Well, as Laurence has just been telling, we started that season after the war under very strange conditions. In fact, we rehearsed a great deal of the time under the table, because we were rehearsing in the National Gallery, which Kenneth Clark was so kind to lend us, because we had no theatre, and had a big glass roof on top, and so with the bugs coming round all the time, the doodle bugs coming, we spent a lot of our speeches under the table, as I say. But the thing is, you see, we were very lucky. We were lucky because the whole country had been under very short commons, not only for food and clothes and everything else, but for music and books and literature. And so we had a fine, strong company, that's true enough. But it was very different from the old days, the days when we worked greatly by experiment.
How much do you think the tradition of the Old Vic was carried on?
The tradition was the same sort of thing, but we were riper and older actors then than we were before. When the old days in the Old Vic, we used to cook up our dramatic bombs, and very often, as far as I'm concerned, I'm afraid they didn't come off at all. However,
what were the advantages of the pre-war Old Vic and the new Old Vic? I mean, each one had something. What would you say they were?
The Old Vic, you see, in the old days, was, as a great theatre really should be, it contained a great deal of student work and experimental work in it. I mean, you can, in the National Gallery, you can hang masterpieces, but they can't always be painted by experienced or masterful actors. They've got to train up some new actors all the time. Ah, well, the Old Vic's been such a long, delightful memory to all of us, to all playgoers and to all actors.
And when you do remember it, what one...
I was just thinking, for one moment, I was remembering Hay Petrie. All theatre goers probably, all actors would surely agree, who saw Hay Petrie was probably one of the finest Shakespeare actors that ever lived. He was a funny little man, with a funny little voice, squeaky little voice. He might have been a stone, he might have been a cloud, he might have been a weasel. But I don't know, somehow he did really seem to speak with a rare voice that of Shakespeare's thought. Another very great favourite of mine, an adorable actress, was Florence Saunders. Lovely, lovely creature. And as you like it, I remember she looked like a chrysanthemum. Really beautiful actress. I'm sure that those people carried in all our memories.
With Ralph Richardson in the post-war company was Sybil Thorndike and Alec Guinness, who played the fool to Olivier's Lear, and later Richard II. It was a varied repertoire in those seasons at the New Theatre. Besides Shakespeare, there was The Cherry Orchard with Edith Evans and Cedric Hardwicke, Anouilh's modern version of the Antigone story with Vivian Leigh, and Moliere's Miser with Miles Malleson. For the last season of the New, in 1949, Hugh Hunt took over the direction, and Michael Redgrave returned to play Hamlet. But the Vic was not only mounting major productions. A sister company in the provinces, the Bristol Old Vic, was launched in 1946. And even more important, a three-sided partnership. The Old Vic School, the Young Vic Company, and the Old Vic Studio Centre was started in London. The directors were Michel Saint-Denis, Glenn Byam-Shaw, and George Devine. They worked mainly in the bombed-out theatre with old scenery stacked in the stores. Byam-Shaw's assistant at the school, John Blatchley, remembers its importance.
When I went to the Vic School to teach, I was a young actor, and I'd been terribly disappointed by the general lack of purpose that I found in the professional theatre. You can't imagine how marvellous it was to suddenly find oneself surrounded by people who were terribly serious. Glenn, Michel, and George. In fact, the whole of the staff. These were people who were not only gifted, who were not only inspiring, but they seemed to be prepared to sacrifice to a certain extent their own individual careers for the sake of trying to build a theatre that they really believed in. This was no museum, this place. It wasn't like the drama school that I went to. It was a laboratory where people who were still working in the contemporary theatre had come together to try to create a real sense of style in acting and presentation, and to foster the ideal of working in a group. Of course, the result of their work is still seen today in the young actors, the young actresses, the young designers, the young directors who have become leading members of their profession. When you consider what that school produced in its brief existence, one can only be really scandalized by the fact that it was closed after 6 years.
So what went wrong? Why did it all end?
Well, the official reason given at the time was that old English favourite, lack of funds. This is, of course, a marvellous cover-up for indifference. We use it all the time. We use it to this very day, don't we? We use it on Joan Littlewood and her theatre workshop. We use it on George Devine at the Royal Court. But whatever the excuse was, those of us who were at the school at the time knew that the school was closed because of that prejudice, that narrow-mindedness, that almost barbaric superstition towards any artistic endeavour that seems to emanate from any group of Englishmen once you take away their individuality and hide them under the anonymity of titles like Board of Governors, Board of Directors, committees for this, that, and the other. So it was prejudice and indifference, plus the fact that the people who closed the school didn't really appreciate what we were trying to do, and that they didn't really choose an investigator who was competent to judge what we were actually doing.
It was tragically ironic that the break-up should come just a few weeks after the reopening of the theatre. For 10 years, the company hadn't played in the Waterloo Road. At last, the bomb damage was repaired. The boxes refurbished, new scenery prepared. The lighting was reinstalled, and rehearsals began. The play was Twelfth Night. Director, Hugh Hunt. In the cast were Peggy Ashcroft as Viola, Roger Livesey, an old favourite of Vic audiences from the 30s, and Alec Clunes. The audience were able to see the Vic Company on its home ground for the first time since 1941, and the opening was a great success. But the Vic took time to recover from the mass resignations of 1951. Guthrie was called back in desperation, did a superb production of Tamburlaine with Donald Wolfett, but didn't stay. Odd productions like Romeo and Juliet with Alan Bedell and Claire Bloom, and Robert Donat in Murder in the Cathedral drew good audiences. But the Vic was far from out of the wood. But in 1953, Michael Benthall took over as direction of productions.
Imaginative ideas and high ideals and so on. But then I found that everything that I'd imagined had to be tempered by necessity of finance. And in fact, when I came here, the Old Vic was in very low water financially, and we had to find some way of putting it on the map, so that the great London public and the great British public would know that once again there was an Old Vic back on the South Bank. So we embarked on what we called the Folio Plan, which was a plan to do all the plays of Shakespeare within 5 years. And so that's what we did. And we opened with Richard Burton in Claire Bloom in Hamlet, and this first season was a great success, and then it became a snowball, and more people wanted to see the whole group of Shakespeare's plays.
In Benthall's first season, the personality of Richard Burton appearing as Hamlet and then as Coriolanus certainly helped to tempt audiences back to the Vic. But as the 5-year plan developed, the Vic went back to its old policy of developing its own actors into leading players within the company. Paul Rogers and Barbara Jefford both did several seasons there and greatly enhanced their own reputations and the Vic's. So did actors like Robert Hardy, William Squire, and John Neville.
I spent 8.5 consecutive years as a member of the Old Vic organization, as an actor. 3 years at the Bristol Old Vic, followed by 5.5 years in London. Those years were very happy, they were very exciting, and of course to me they were very rewarding. They were the culmination of a childhood ambition. As a London schoolboy, I had seen my very first live plays at the Old Vic. I saw Twelfth Night with Sir Laurence Olivier as Toby Belch and Sir Alec Guinness as Andrew Aguecheek, and I saw John Gielgud play Prospero and King Lear. These men became my idols.
While you were there, you had a tremendous personal following of teenage fans. You were very much top of the Shakespearean pops, as you might say. Looking back on it now, would you say that this new audience was an asset to the theatre?
Well, at the time, one was so involved from play to play. One was so busy. One couldn't see it, perhaps, in true perspective. One was very involved in it. One was perhaps a little worried by it. The press made great capital out of it. They tried to turn Richard Burton and myself into great rivals, and we were, in fact, great friends. But looking back on it now, objectively, I can see that one brought into the theatre a great number of young people who, in fact, remained as an audience. And this is the important thing. They remained there.
The 5-year plan completed, the Old Vic seemed to lose its sense of direction for a while. But it flared back to life with Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, which silenced those who were beginning to think of the Vic as just a school's matinee theatre. The sort of pull it still had over young actors is reflected by Tommy Steele, who was in Australia when he first heard from the Vic and had just been sent a modern comedy to read, which he rather fancied.
And I got another beige envelope. So I opened that, and there it was. She Stoops to Conquer, the Old Vic. So I went, oh no, well, you know, what am I going to do now? So I sat there in the dressing room, and I looked at the two plays. There was She Stoops to Conquer by Oliver Goldsmith, in a little blue sort of school sort of book of it. And there was Willis Hall's copy of Billy Liar. So which one of the two am I going to go for? So in the end, I said to myself, well, I think I'll go for the honour more than anything else, because it's a wonderful honour to go to the Old Vic. And also, as everyone always told me, that anyone that ever goes to the Old Vic, you go to learn. You don't go to earn. The only thing you'll earn at the Old Vic really is knowledge about the text, the true way of sort of speaking a text and making it live, which is what they can teach you. And so I said, right, I'll go to the Old Vic.
Were you nervous about going there? Do you think it'd be a quite different sort of theatre to what you were used to?
I was in a terrible state. I said to myself, well, for one thing, I couldn't understand all of Goldsmith because he had some of these weird words in it. And then the day came for the actual first reading through with the company. And I arrived at the Old Vic, and I was about 15 minutes late. I got caught in some traffic. And as I arrived at the stage door, there was Michael Benthall there and Dougie Seal, the director, with a beard. So this started me off for a start. He looked just like an Old Vic director, you know. They took me upstairs to the top room, and all the company was sitting there. And I was so nervous, you know. And I was like, so suddenly I was wishing that I'd studied English and literature a little more better at school, you know. I'm not the greatest commander of the English language, as you know. So I walked in shaking like a leaf. And all of a sudden they stood up. And I was introduced to each of the company one by one. There was Peggy Mount, Judy Dench, Nicholas Meredith. And all of a sudden, someone lit a woodbine. And I couldn't believe it. I just stood and I looked and puffed on it. I went, oh, blimey, relieved, they're human, you know.
For its last season, the Vic appointed a new director, Michael Elliott. Leo McKern's Peer Gynt started the season off with a bang. Guthrie did a modern dress version of The Alchemist. Elliott himself produced 3 plays, including The Merchant of Venice. The Old Vic, said the press, is going out like a lion.
I suppose the thing I shall always remember most about the Old Vic was my first day there. I'd never worked in, certainly never directed an institution of that kind, and I walked around the building on my own, that extraordinary haunted old building, and at every corner there seemed to be a ghost who poked out his head and said, "Who is this presumptuous young man?" The glorious past of the Vic, you know, has become a great burden. And I think it's become a burden increasingly in the last years. I met a woman journalist the other day who I suppose is about 50, and she said, "Isn't it sad that the Old Vic is coming to an end?" And I said to her, "When did you last go to the Old Vic?" And she said, "Ah, well, of course, it's many a long year now." And I said, "Well, exactly. If the Old Vic isn't supported by its public, why should it continue to exist?" When I was asked to go there, I was only asked to go for 1 year, because it was almost certain that the National Theatre would start. And if it hadn't been only 1 year, I think I would have refused, because I knew that the kind of struggle that Michael Benthall had been having in the last years, and I think he was a martyr to a sense of great duty, and a man who did great things for the Vic. If it hadn't been for his struggle, the Vic would certainly have finished, and it was against a situation which was quite a new one. The Old Vic's old audience, I think, had lost its life, and the new audience in the West End had never seen much interest in the theatre, and has never been persuaded to come over except for occasional successes, 1 every 2 seasons or something like that. And secondly, I think that many of the great actors whom we've seen tonight had left the theatre because they had naturally and rightly gone to other fields, and there was no new generation to replace them. Perhaps there never will be a new generation to replace them. or at least the actors who might do so now are more interested in films and wouldn't want to work for those kind of salaries and to do that kind of work. In fact, I think that rapidly the situation became one in which that theatre, started by those two marvellous old ladies with a moral and social purpose, was playing for an audience that no longer existed. And for it to exist and be alive in the contemporary theatre, it required changes in its traditions and in its image, which were impossible while it was still called the Old Vic and run in the image of the past. And if I had ever stayed for a second season, I would have wanted to make changes which certainly would never have been agreed to, and I would have understood that. I think that a rebirth is necessary. And I think that the National Theatre, by having a new name, has a clean slate and a fresh start. It can have a new image with the public, it has more money, it can begin to present a kind of repertoire which the audience may again be interested in large numbers. And when the curtain falls for the last time on the Old Vic in a few minutes, I think we should remember, even if we feel sad, that rebirth is necessary. And you know, it is a necessity before rebirth, fortunately or unfortunately, that there should be death.
To a whore. Your Highness, that even now that I made your Duke, do not recompense me in making me a cuckold.
By mine honour thou shalt marry her. Thy slanders I forgive, and therewithal remit thy other forfeits. Officer!
But marrying a punk, my lord, is pressing to death, whipping and hanging.
Slandering a prince deserves it. She, Claudio, that you wrong, look you restore. Joy to you, Marianne. Love her, Angela. I have confessed her, and I know her virtue. Thanks, good friend Aeschylus, for thy much goodness. There's more behind that is more gratuitous. Thanks, Provost, for thy care and secrecy. We shall employ thee in a worthier place. Dear Isabel, I have a motion much imports your good, whereto if you'll a willing ear incline. What's mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. So, bring us to our palace, where we'll show what's yet behind, that's meet you all should know.
It's not a death. It is, in fact, the consummation of a marriage. This marriage was made 17 years ago. 17 years ago, Tony Guthrie brought us the news, Ralph Richardson and myself and John Barrow, that the National Theatre wanted to make a marriage with the Old Vic. We thought about it, Ralph and I talked about it all through many nights. And we came to the conclusion that this would have been the thing that Lilian would have liked, that her Old Vic should be the National Theatre. In this way, we also saw that it was a continuity of her work, and the only way we could safely guarantee it. I know that some people must feel a sense of regret that the name of the company shall be changed from the Old Vic Company, but the theatre will still be called the Old Vic Theatre. And I think in any case, that is rather an emotional objection. I think the practical thing is to call it the National Theatre. If we have a National Theatre, it should be called so. I think most people will agree with that. I don't think Lilian would have disagreed with that. In any case, this is really a marriage in its true sense. When we start there, and I hope for many years to come, certainly 90% of the theatre staff are still with us from the Old Vic. Almost everybody in the organization has had something to do with the Old Vic at some time or another. Almost every actor that you see there will at some time or another, if they're over a certain age, that is, be found on our boards. In fact, it is hardly possible to find a very good actor who has not been at the Old Vic at some time or another. This is not a death. It is a change. If you like, it is a new life. Shakespeare will still be seen in the Waterloo Road, and the dream of Lilian Baylis will be kept intact.
On this important day in the long history of the Old Vic, I bring you our oldest friend, Dame Sybil.
Your Royal Highness, lords, ladies, and gentlemen, this is a joyous occasion. The Old Vic is flowering. The Old Vic is coming out of a chrysalis and turning into something else, something bigger, something more wonderful. It is, I can almost hear Lilian saying, "That's quite right, dear." Now, nobody's to think of this as a sad evening at all. Nostalgia, get away. Regrets, no good. We have to go on and on. We want the National Theatre to be something big and splendid, and it will be. And with Laurence, who is a passionate lover of the theatre, a fine actor. Oh, think of the time when he did Othello, when Ralph played Othello and he was the Argo. What a splendid thing that was. One can go over infinite number of performances, but there is not time to tell them all. The National Theatre is to be something which the Old Vic is dedicated to. We shall never forget the name of the Old Vic, because that will be in our minds and our hearts, we who have loved the Old Vic and have played here. So many I can see in the audience this evening who we have worked with, some well known, some not so well known, but all of us felt, because of someone at the head, that was Lilian, who was a dedicated person and who cared far more for what her theatre was doing than for any personal things at all. And that is why I feel now we are going on to something really big, because Laurence has got that feeling at the back of his mind that we are doing something for our country, something to make our country more aware of itself, to make us more aware of everything that's happening all over the world, amongst all peoples, all races and nations. We who in the theatre of all places, it does teach us to understand other human beings that probably we don't want to know in ordinary life. And ladies and gentlemen, it is that makes us feel that we are going on to something splendid and creative and something which is going to be for the benefit of the people of England. We have also got a good friendly rival in the Royal Theatre of Stratford. And a good friendly rival is a thing that will stop us all going to sleep. Now, there are so many names I could go through of the darling people that we've worked with and the lovely times we've had here, but it is not possible because there is a new and bastard art that is somewhere down in the corner there. And this thing says, so much time you are allowed and no more. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us all remember these old names. Let us bring our trumpets and shawms and say, glory be to the new theatre, to the Vic that is burgeoning into a new shape, a new life, a great leap forward. That is the thing that we are looking forward to. And glory be to the Old Vic, and glory be to all the people, the lovely people in this audience who have played here, and we are happy together, and we've loved it, and we like to think of Lilian sitting somewhere, and and we want tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we want tonight to feel we are in the march with the Old Vic, changing, we are going with the Old Vic to see her change into something bigger and be led in the front by Laurence, Olivier, Lilian Baylis walking beside him as a spirit and saying, come on, come on. Now we'll go forward to bigger work, finer work, and congratulations for all the work in this last nearly 50 years. One is proud, and I know everybody in the audience that has played at the Old Vic is proud to have been a member of this company and worked here solidly and well. And after the performance tonight, one can feel so enormously cheered to think that there is a group of actors who can give a living, understanding performance of the greatest playwright that we have ever had or the world has ever had. So good luck to the Old Vic, and never mind changing a name. I mean, if a man's going to be made a lord, he often changes his name. And why shouldn't the Old Vic go forward into a splendid new heritage of the National Theatre of England? Good luck to her, good luck to us all, and audiences will be great. And when the new building comes... when the new building comes, shan't we be proud to see it? I hope I shan't be in the tomb by then. But a lot of us, and some of us at the very beginning, are getting very feeble now. But we shall see this thing growing and being a strong, stalwart, splendid, living theatre in our beloved country. Thank you very much for letting me come.
what I was, and a little tiny boy, with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain. A foolish thing was but a toy, for the rain it raineth every day. With a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came to man's estate, with a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, came knaves and thieves, men shut the gate, for the rain it raineth every day. With a hey-ho, the wind and the rain, for the rain it raineth every day.